Animals. You know and love them, you have them in your home, in your yard, and can see them all around you. Everyone has a favorite animal, an animal that best describes them, or an animal that, if they could, they'd love to be able to speak to. But what about those animals that precluded us, or animals that have gone extinct in our lifetime? What experiences did we miss out on because certain animals were forced into extinction due to human-made issues?
Today, we're going to be looking at animals that have gone extinct because of us, and animal species that are facing those very same issues that extinct animals faced in the past. Everywhere we look, we see species that are suffering due to a plethora of issues. Our goal is to investigate what is truly driving these extinctions. How can we look at issues and look for a solution? How can we be better for the animals that live around us? We're here to look at these very issues and discuss exactly what we can and even what we can't do.
Let's dive into today's episode. We're covering habitat loss, the illegal wildlife trade, invasive species, ocean acidification, climate change, pollution, and the animals that are experiencing and have experienced loss due to these problems. Welcome to Mirror Species, the extinct and the endangered. Alrighty, let's get into this. My name is Lena.
And I'm Sid.
And our first key point of our episode today is going to be habitat loss. Now, habitat loss is defined as the reduction in the amount of space where a particular species or group of species can survive and reproduce. This is from Understanding Global Change, and the animal that I'm going to be talking about today and will be talking about for the rest of the episodes are the extinct animals. And so I'll be discussing our first animal, the little flat-topped snail that went extinct due to habitat loss. So the little flat-topped snail is now extinct. It used to live primarily and only in Alabama, so it was endemic to Alabama. It is a kingdom Animalia, phylum Mollusca, class Gastropoda. Its scientific name was Neopanorbis tantalus. And in 2012, it was unfortunately listed as presumed to be extinct or extinct because the habitat type it lived in, the wetlands, inland, continued to decline in area, extent, and or quality of habitat. And so this animal unfortunately went extinct in 2012 due to habitat loss. Of course, not to say that there are not multitude of reasons that animals go extinct, but its primary reason that it went extinct was due to habitat loss. And so Sid, want to take over on an endangered animal that's going extinct due to habitat loss?
Absolutely. I would love to talk about an endangered species that's going extinct due to habitat loss. And the species we've chosen to speak about today is the cheetah. Its scientific name is Acinonyx jubatus. It's a large cat and the fastest land mammal. Animal, even. Fastest land animal.
Mm-hmm.
The cheetah is, of course, known because it can purr, but not roar.
Mm-hmm.
One of its defining features. The range of the cheetah is from Africa to central Iran. And the cheetah, of course, is a carnivore and depends on prey, which will become an issue for them due to habitat loss.
Mm-hmm.
Because while they are, of course, losing their living space and that sort of thing, they are also losing their hunting grounds and the prey upon those hunting grounds, which they would hunt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and aren't they currently, I believe cheetahs are currently being bottlenecked as well right now due to that habitat loss.
Yeah, they are being bottlenecked. Because their population has gotten so low, as tends to happen while species are going extinct.
Mm-hmm.
The gene pool that is available to them has become so entwined within itself that the genetic variability is really putting them in a perilous situation here.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and all to blame on the expansion of human settlements. They are very rarely found in their further east reaching extents of their habitat. And the fragmentation of these habitats has made it again, so much harder for them to find mates and maintain this genetic variability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, just again, those are our two animal mirror species. The little flat-top snail, who was unfortunately extinct, but we do have the cheetah that is an endangered species.
It's listed as vulnerable.
Vulnerable, and an animal that we can still support and can still save, even though we have lost one species already to habitat loss. Moving right on, our key point number 2 for this episode is going to be the illegal wildlife trade / poaching. Now, I'm just going to really quick define poaching before we get into this. It is illegally hunting or catching game or fish on land that is not one's own or in contravention of official protection. And so this goes for a lot of different species, but the two that we're going to be focusing on today, and the one that I'm going to be focusing on that is extinct, is the Pyrenean ibex. Now, the Pyrenean ibex is a subspecies of the ibex. Thankfully, the species as a whole, ibex, are not all extinct, but this specific subspecies unfortunately is. And so the Pyrenean ibex was unfortunately killed off due to just massive amounts of poaching, of trophy hunting in the Spanish Pyrenees. Really, they were just completely wiped out by just poachers in general. And of course, I mean, it's kind of devastating to read about, because it's unfortunately they just went extinct. There's still, of course, ibex around. Just a really quick update you, the species is called Pyrenaica, as well as in the family Bovidae and the subfamily Capernae. Of course, we do still have some of those animals, but Pyrenean ibex died. The last known was in January 2000. The last Pyrenean ibex died. It made the species extinct. There are, of course, the Gredos ibex and the Portuguese ibex that still live on to this day. But unfortunately, even though we've tried to clone it before, we have not been able to see those around anymore, primarily due to trophy hunting, poaching, and illegal wildlife hunting. So would you like to talk about a species that's currently facing this problem today?
Yeah, one of the species that is most impacted by poaching today would be the black rhino. So the black rhino is the smaller of the two rhino species that we find in Africa, and its range spans from Kenya all the way south to South Africa. It's got a massive range, although it's really mostly only found in the southeastern extents of the African continent at this point, due to the massive amount of poaching that the species faces and the relatively higher quantity of protected lands that we find in these countries like Namibia and Zimbabwe and South Africa versus most of the other countries. So the black rhino is currently listed as critically endangered. This is because their horn on the front of their face is highly prized by these poachers. They can sell them for a lot of money for traditional medicine.
Yeah.
And so they've been absolutely decimated by this trade. One fact about the black rhino that is really highlights this issue is that 96% of them were poached between 1972 and 1996.
Oh my
and
God.
that value is coming from traffic.org. They really focus on these sorts of animals, but yeah, 96%. In recent years, it's really only sort of gotten better because of how many are protected and how many we've already lost. It's estimated that 3 rhino are poached every day in South Africa alone. God. So yeah, really devastating experience that these animals are having currently. Yeah.
Okay, well, that was the black rhino, of course. Our second half to our animals being currently affected by illegal wildlife trade / poaching. And I'm sure you probably noticed said something about traffic.org. We do have a list of organizations in our description, as well as we'll list a few organizations at the end of our episode that you can go to if you feel moved by any of these animals' stories or any of these species, and if you take a particular concern in any of them, we'll have one that you can donate to or go out and volunteer for in the description and also at the end of this video. And so that was illegal wildlife trade / poaching with the Pyrenean ibex and the black rhino. There are still things that we can do for the black rhino today. Unfortunately, we may have lost the Pyrenean ibex, but of course that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still move forward with bettering conservation as a whole. Hitting our key point number 3 today, that's going to be the invasive species. We're looking at 2 species here, the bridled white-eye and the Guam flying fox. And just a quick aside, invasive species are defined as non-native organisms that cause harm to the environment, economy, or human health. We're obviously going to be focusing primarily on the environment today. And the animal that I'm going to be focusing on that unfortunately has gone extinct is the Guam flying fox. Now, you'll never guess where this animal's from. It's from Guam. It's in the Marianas Islands in Micronesia. It was unfortunately confirmed extinct and since has not been seen. The scientific name is Pteropus tokudae. It is in the phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Chiroptera. Unfortunately, the last specimen was a female found roosting in a cliff in March 1967. It did escape capture, so we were never able to actually bring it in and be able to try and rework and get that species reintroduced back into the wild. But unfortunately, this animal largely went extinct due to the introduction of the predatory brown tree snake, Boiga irregularis. And so when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposed declaring the species extinct, it was 2021, it was delisted 2023, but this predatory brown tree snake was an invasive species. It's also called the brown cat snake, just as an aside, if you know it better by that name. It's an arboreal, rear-fanged snake native to eastern and northern Australia, but unfortunately it was introduced to Guam. That eventually killed out the flying fox, primarily due to the fact that it never had this sort of predator before, and just due to the fact that it had no adaptations to defend against this invasive species. And so that is my animal that I've been focusing on for the extinct side of invasive species. Sid, take over for the endangered species now.
Absolutely. So the endangered species that we'll be looking at for invasives is the Rota white-eye or Rota bridled white-eye. It's a species of flocking bird that's endemic to Rota. It's actually just north of Guam in the northern Mariana Islands. Due to this, you can imagine that it faces the same issues as the Guam flying fox with these brown tree snakes, but there are also a couple of other invasive species that this bird is facing right now, including the black drongo and rats.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, rats a big one.
I mean, between the rats, the drongos, and the snakes, this species is really just facing a myriad of issues. They really are struggling right now, just because their eggs are really vulnerable to all of these species. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to be said about the Rota bridled white-eye. Their scientific name is Zosterops rotensis. They're in the family Zosteropidae, and they are quite striking little creatures. If you want to take a look at them, they're beautiful little yellow birds. But because they're really just limited to this one island in the Mariana Islands, it's a really well, actually, this is a great time to talk about this, but island species are at an increased risk when it comes to these extinction, like the threats. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I know invasive species can get extremely hard because not only are you competing with animals that have never had this animal cross into their territory. I mean, there's no way to just hop onto a boat unless you're an invasive species like a rat going to a new island. You can't just swim across like thousands of miles. So these islands are just getting wiped out by the introduction of a species that's never been even known there before.
Exactly. They're completely blindsided by these predators that they've never had to deal with in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was our two species, bridled white-eye and the Guam flying fox. Guam flying fox, of course, the extinct animal. Bridled white-eye, an animal that we can still save today, still being affected by invasive species, but we still can do what we can for them. And so moving right on, our key point number 4 is ocean acidification, and we're looking at two species here, one a little bit more vague, and the other a little bit more general. The coral and calcium-based life forms, and just really quick before we get into that, ocean acidification is the process by which the ocean's pH levels decrease over time, making the ocean more acidic. Of course, if you've ever taken a chemistry class, everyone knows that as pH goes down, acidity goes up, basically. And so what we're looking at is just two different species, both being affected by that. I'm primarily going to be looking at calcium-based life forms, and so that's very vague for a good reason. These are animals or species that went extinct not anytime recently, primarily because ocean acidification isn't something that we've had to deal with in really any time before pretty much the last extinction events that happened, the Permian-Triassic extinction event, the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event. All of those had ocean acidification, but that was because there was an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide that was happening from different events. Of course, everyone knows about the asteroid meteor that crashed through here, and of course, that raised the carbon dioxide. And so that was our biggest event. And that was our primary calcium-based life form extinction event. That was all coming from literal change in carbon dioxide levels that happened due to earth-shattering meteorite damage. And so that's our only option, really, for calcium-based life form extinction. And also the only option for species that have gone extinct from ocean acidification in the past. And truly, I do think that is a little bit heartbreaking to know that we are now doing the same kind of damage that basically the world's biggest extinction events were causing. And unfortunately, I don't have anything fantastic to say, any big encouragements as we can deal with the calcium-based life forms, obviously because they died 250 million years ago. But we do have a species that we can still save here. Sid, if you want to take over.
Of course. Well, not so much a species as a group of species. We will be looking at the coral as a whole. They are, of course, colonial marine invertebrates, part of the phylum Cnidaria, which they share with other species such as anemones and jellyfish. So considering that this is an entire group of species, just like a diverse number of carbon-based life forms, you would be correct to say that we are in an unprecedented time looking at these species potentially facing the entire extinction of their subfamily. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Of course, we know that the ocean acidification, when it occurs, it just absolutely destroys the coral in its path. It's currently already impacting the Great Barrier Reef due to the fact that, the ocean acidification comes in, it reduces the concentration of carbonate ions that are required for these mostly hard corals to create new portions of their colonial organism portions.
Yeah.
And due to this, really just completely incapable of continuing to live on this earth because of the amount of carbon dioxide we're putting into the atmosphere. You know, the ocean is our largest carbon sink.
Yeah.
So we might not be feeling it currently as humans.
Yeah.
Although I think that the Tuvalu and Pakistanians would disagree due to the fact that they are definitely feeling the effects of climate change. But we should look no further than our own Caribbean coral reefs to see the effect that we're already having on these incredible organisms and ecosystems that they sustain.
Yeah.
It's really quite disheartening.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everyone knows you can compare coral with the Amazon rainforest and the amount of diversity and life that it harbors. And those are two very distinct, that we have animals and species that live there that are found nowhere else. And to know that those animals are currently being threatened, of course, the Amazon rainforest in different ways, but coral by something that truly we have not dealt with since our major extinction events. It is very sad to see, but we do still have resources that can go towards coral. We are making a lot of progress in moving forward and protecting our species, especially like the Great Barrier Reef. We're trying to do cleanup. And so
I would say, actually, this is because of their uniqueness and the draw that they have to people. They're really in a more privileged spot than a lot of these species that we were talking about, because they're something that people admire the beauty of, and they care about protecting it. So ideally, these should be something really driving our conservation efforts with the general public that might not really care about them otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just a quick wrap up, that was our two species, again, kind of more general topics, calcium-based life forms that have gone extinct due to massive extinction events in our past, and unfortunately coral that is going extinct now, but that we can help fight against their extinction by promoting knowledge about ocean acidification, but also by going to the links in the description that are here to help coral and here to make sure that we are promoting and being able to keep those vibrant life forms and species alive in coral. And so we're going to move straight on to key point number 5. This is climate change. And so we're looking at two different animal species, the golden toad and the mysterious lantern firefly. So, just, of course, as always, I'm going to define climate change really quick. United Nations actually defines climate change as long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. And I like that it says something else really quick. Such shifts can be natural due to changes in the sun's activity or large volcanic eruptions, but since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. And so that was quoted from the United Nations. And so I'm actually gonna quick talk about the golden toad. And so that is our extinct animal that went extinct due to climate change. And so the golden toad, or better known as its scientific name, I say better known, it really is not, Encilius peregrinus, is sadly presumed to be extinct. It was recorded its last sighting was in 1989, but the species was officially listed as extinct in 2004. Quick aside, you might be wondering, why is there such a large gap? That's going to be about 15 years since that animal was last seen, and yet it took that long to be listed as extinct. Unfortunately, it is incredibly hard to get a species listed as extinct. Number one, the general public is usually against it. And number two, a very large part that we will likely talk about a little bit more is the fact that if a species is officially listed extinct, its protections against habitat loss, against just any of the dangers that would come with being a live animal species are completely gone, completely wiped out. And so a lot of the times when animals like the golden toad, who had a lot of issues with the forests of Costa Rica and where they were, that had high humidity, constant mists, and canopies, this like the environmental change and the change in climate, once they were listed as extinct, could no longer be protected against. And so companies could come in and do whatever they want. But of course, that's just a quick aside about why it is a little bit difficult to get animals listed as extinct. But let's get more into the golden toads. So, of course, like I said already, golden toads were native to Costa Rica. They were around 1,500 meters above sea level. They had high humidity, constant mist. They had canopies of just dense foliage. And they could only be found in 4 square kilometers of this range. And so, just like we were talking about earlier, this animal is endemic to this area. It cannot be found anywhere else. And so it was super sensitive and vulnerable to environmental change. So when there was a sudden change in climate, where even just a couple years of abnormal weather patterns, such as severe droughts, it wiped out their population. Another thing really quick to mention, because while climate change was the main reason, there is a theory that golden toads may have gotten extinct after exposure to chytrid fungus, which thrives in warm, dry conditions and has threatened several toad species around the world. But of course, we're talking about climate change, and so while the golden toad unfortunately has lost its life and is no longer alive as a species, Sid will now be talking about an animal that we can still save, a species that we can still save, that is currently being affected by climate change today.
Yeah, so this species is really quite an extraordinary one. This is the mysterious lantern firefly. So the mysterious lantern firefly, also known by its scientific name Photurus mysticolampus.
Ooh.
Yeah, fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a species of lightning bug that's a habitat specialist, only found in the tidal freshwater floodplains of the Delmarva Peninsula, which it's mostly in Maryland, but it covers some of Delaware.
Yeah.
It's really limited to just this small area of the United States, which is contributing greatly to the threats that it faces. So this really interesting animal, I want to give a little fact about it because I find it so fascinating. But the species is one of the only lightning bug species known to use its flashing patterns to mimic the patterns of other lightning bug species in order to draw them in and kill and eat them.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, super interesting. It's only the females
cannibalism.
of the species that does that. Not cannibalism. They're drawing in other lightning bug species by mimicking their flashing patterns.
Interesting. Okay.
It's so cool. It's really interesting, and they ingest these other species in order to pass on toxins to their offspring that they then are able to use to, ward off predators. They're
sick.
so cool.
Yeah.
This little species so cool, which is why it makes it so much more devastating that Maryland has them listed as a critically imperiled species. So the IUCN only currently has them listed as endangered, but Maryland has really prioritized the species in their own personal conservation. Just because of, again, it's such a unique little species that is only found in one area. And the reason why we're seeing so many of these habitats being lost for the species is due to the climate change effects on our sea level of the heightened severity of storms. They just come in and completely wreak havoc on the egg laying areas, the breeding grounds of these species.
Yeah.
So it's really just completely inundating these floodplains that they are dependent upon for their whole lives.
Yeah.
It's gotten so bad recently that of 1 or 2, I think they only really exist within one or two main species, or
Wow.
species, locations. 4 to 5 have been predicted or like sort of assumed to be areas where they're found, but really they're down to probably 3 to 4 because of how much has been lost to these flooding events that we've been seeing with heightened hurricane seasons, for example. So really, as climate changes and all these storms continue to worsen in their severity, we're only going to see more of these unique habitat specialist species being wiped out.
And it's just like we were talking about earlier. I feel like we've repeated this again, and it happens with so many species. These animals that are unique and stay in one area, that are endemic to that one area, are at such risk. And obviously island species, perfect examples, but even like the golden toad, and then now of course with a mysterious lantern firefly, like we're seeing these animals that live in one area get those effects of climate change that other more general species aren't getting, and it's wiping them out. And of course, this has been our talk on climate change. The mysterious lantern firefly is thankfully still alive. We actually have a dedicated organization that you can find at the end of this episode, and then also in the description, that is for helping the mysterious lantern firefly. It's such an amazing species, and Maryland is doing so much to help them. And while we may have lost the golden toad, that doesn't mean that you cannot help the firefly in just keeping it alive. And so we're going to finally hit on our last key point, number 6, pollution. And our 2 animals will be acorn shell mussel and actually sea turtles as a whole. So that'll be that you'll come to find out pretty quickly why it's sea turtles as a whole. Sid will explain that. But I'm going to be going over the acorn shell mussel. And first, of course, I'm just going to define pollution really quick. It is the contamination of the air, land, or water by substances that can harm human health and the environment. As always, we're focusing more on the environment, and I'm going to be focusing on the acorn shell mussels, which is a species that is currently extinct and delisted from everywhere due to its extinction. So the southern acorn shell, or the Epioblasma othcaloeugenesis, this was a mussel endemic to the upper Coosa River system and upstream of the fall line on the Cahaba River in Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. And so the last specimen, the last organism of the species was collected in 1973 from the Conasauga River in Georgia and from Little Canoe Creek near the Etowah and St. Clair County line in Alabama. It has not since been collected from the Cahaba River. It was determined that this likely was due to pollution in the rivers that it was supporting. Something that not a lot of people know, but that is becoming more popular, is the saying that when you're looking at how clean rivers, lakes, any large bodies of water, any like bodies of water that is known to have mollusks in it, that the best way to view and the best way to determine whether that is safe to swim in, safe to be in, is if it has mussels and if it has animals that are literally living their life just sorting through the water and just living in the water itself. And so mussels are a great species to look at to determine the health and safety of different bodies of water. And unfortunately, it looks like the Coosa River and possibly the Cahaba River just became way too polluted, and we lost this mussel species. It was, of course, in the class Bivalvia and the phylum Mollusca. It is, of course, a mollusk. And its historical habitat just severely degraded by habitat modification, pollution, and it was just unfortunately declared extinct in 2023, even though it was only listed as endangered in 1993. It took until 30 years later, pardon my math, for it actually to be declared extinct. And just another example of a lot of sometimes you'll see with a lot of our smaller species, our less charismatic species, especially the mollusks, the mussels that we're looking at, they are not as evaluated. And so when you're looking at things like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the IUCN, there's just sometimes a lack of information, and they miss that critical time period where they need help. And so one of the ways is that you can help that is by looking for information, by making sure and keeping updated to see whether or not these animals, these species are being evaluated, and helping those that are endemic to these small spaces that are losing their habitats. And so that was the last animal that I'll be talking about, the acorn shell mussel. And now I'll go over to sea turtles with Sid.
So, we're going to talk about now the sea turtles, just in general sea turtles. You know, there's the green sea turtle, the olive ridley sea turtle, the loggerhead sea turtle, the hawksbill sea turtle, the leatherback sea turtle. All of these sea turtles are going to be put at such a high risk by pollution. Human anthropogenic pollution. There are 3 different types of pollution that we are doing currently that are hurting these species.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, we should look at, of course, the obvious one that everyone first thinks of when they think of turtles and pollution, and that would be marine debris.
Yeah.
So, you know, many of these species, their prey is jellyfish and other funny-looking sea marine organisms.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can imagine that to a species like this, a plastic bag would look scrumptious.
Yeah,
It would
yeah.
look just like a little jellyfish. So they go up, they eat these things. Oh no, now there's plastic in their stomachs. So plastics and other marine debris really are killing so many individuals, from intestinal blockages, malnutrition because of these intestinal blockages. Sometimes just they die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Specifically from this plastic pollution. And like, really, it's not something that you're thinking about living in an inland state as we are, but all of your trash could end up in the ocean. So really, we should be thinking about what we're doing with these single-use plastics.
Yeah.
But it's not just these single-use plastics that they're eating that are like really coming for them.
Okay.
It's also the discarded fishing technology. That you know, fisheries, they either lose it or they just straight up discard it. And this can cause entanglements, which are horrific. They just get stuck in ropes and nets and die. There is, of course, technology that's been developed to try and solve this issue, but it's nowhere near the point where it should be yet, and we continue to just discard this stuff into the ocean.
Prioritizing the economy, of course,
Of
first.
course, as we always do.
Absolutely.
We love the capitalist society that we live in. Anyways, the second type of pollution that's really, you know, more of a catastrophe level, like pollution, would be oil pollution.
Yeah.
So we can think about the fact that, like, you know, Deepwater Horizon and the BP oil spills that have occurred, those they prevent these species from being able to surface for air, which is obviously going to be an issue. But it's not just oil that has been hurting these species. The contamination of our seawater by other pollutants like PCBs and heavy metals, it really... Industrial runoff is one of the biggest issues that we don't really think of all that often. So like industrial runoff, agricultural runoff, all of these liquids that end up in the ocean are full of contaminants. This could be chemicals they use on plants, chemicals who knows what coming out of factories. All of these things end up in the bodies of these marine animals that we care about.
Yeah.
Particularly, of course, the sea turtle.
Yeah.
People really care about sea turtles.
Rightfully so.
Yeah, I love sea turtles personally. One of my earliest
Fantastic.
conservation experiences was
Yeah.
with sea turtles. So I have a special place in my heart for these little guys. But really, this exposure to contaminants like this, it's been devastating for these species. It's actually one of the worst things about this is that their reproductive systems can be affected by this type of pollution.
Okay.
Yeah. So like, it can. I mean, of course, heavy metals not great for your egg-laying abilities, that type of thing.
Yeah,
but
egg composition.
yeah, exactly. It's really not cool. It hurts them. It hurts their, if they're grazers, it hurts the seabeds on which they need to like eat their sea grasses, all of that.
Yeah.
So really another devastating form of pollution. And lastly, this is something that has been of interest more so in recent years, but light pollution. Light and noise pollution are really, I think, a sort of... They seem benign to us as humans. We're just used to constantly having our lights on, constantly having road noise, that type of thing. But sea turtles, so sensitive to light and noise pollution.
Yeah.
So when they're coming up on these beaches that we've built up upon for our, our own vacation and recreational purposes, they come up to these beaches, the beach on which they were born. And they get up there. They get super disoriented from these lights and car noises, and it can drive them away from their nesting sites. And this is, again, hurting the future of these species.
Yeah.
This is a critical point in these turtles' lives, and we're preventing it from happening just by, leaving the lights in your condo, your beachfront condo on.
Yeah.
Using flashlights on the beach at night when you should be using red lights, that sort of thing. So it's really an issue for the adults. It's an issue for the hatchlings. They can become disoriented and not understand where they're going.
Because it's based on the
the moonlight. They follow the moonlight into the water, and they see it reflecting off those waves. But when you have all of these other light sources, it's just... I'd be confused too if I had just hatched out of an egg.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I know one thing, and it's go towards the light. There's so many lights.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you think about it, we do a lot of other things on the coast that cause like massive amounts of noise pollution, such as launch sites.
Yes.
There's these SpaceX sites along the coast of Texas. There's the ones on the coast, Cape Canaveral in Florida.
Yeah.
And these launches can also really be a disorienting event for these very sensitive animals.
Yeah.
Very, very emotional, sensitive animals.
Yeah.
It's I'm sorry, I just get so passionate about sea turtles.
Honestly, a fantastic wrap-up for the last bit of our pollution talk. I think so many times we focus on one type of pollution, especially with different species, and it's always like, oh, what about plastic? What about fishing lines? People forget about the things that we as humans and we as people visiting, like, beachfront communities are also doing as well. And so that was the talk from Sid about sea turtles. Again, most of our sea turtle species are still alive to this day. They are endangered. They all are vulnerable, but we can still do things to help them. And we'll also be talking about a little bit later things that you can do as a person of the general public to help fight against just these issues that you may not have thought of in the first point. Maybe that's simply turning the lights off when you leave, especially if you're living, like Sid was talking about, on the coastlines of whatever country you're in. But then it's also figuring out who to donate to, figuring out how you can get involved. And so just as a quick wrap up, that was our pollution talk. We covered 6 different topics throughout this episode. Habitat loss, the illegal wildlife trade / poaching, invasive species, ocean acidification, climate change, and pollution. And we discussed the animals that are experiencing problems due to those issues, but then also animals that we have lost due to them. And so just to wrap up the finish of our episode, the back part of our episode, we just want to thank you for your listening, and yeah. So, we've covered 6 different pairs of animals, both extinct and endangered. While we may have lost a plethora of different animals in the past due to human-made issues, there are still ways that we can help make sure that that doesn't happen again. A few things that you can do are as follows. First, identify those responsible for the ever-growing list of threatened species.
Then, you can make a change in your daily habits. Buy green, healthy products that don't back the same companies that are harming these species. Use sustainable transportation when it's available to you, and follow all relevant guidelines for parks and other locations to avoid bringing invasive species into new areas. Understand relevant policies that are affecting animals and conservation alike, especially those involving the Endangered Species Act and other adjacent laws. And most importantly, donate, educate, and volunteer. Educate your friends and family and peers about the dangers of pollution, climate change, poaching, and any other threat that we've mentioned in this podcast. And of course, donate to organizations, or if you cannot donate, volunteer for organizations that support the belief that conservation is centered around and meant for animals. Some organizations that you can trust, specifically when it comes to the species that we've covered in this podcast, are as follows. For the cheetah and its habitat loss, you can visit the cheetah.org Cheetah Conservation Fund. For the black rhino and the threats that it's facing from poaching, you can visit the International Rhino Foundation or even the traffic.org Foundation. Not quite foundation, but it's an organization that is aiming to limit the illegal animal trade that is causing this poaching in the first place. For the bridled white-eye and its invasive species that are threatening it, you can visit the National Aviary, as they have conservation projects specifically in the Mariana Islands to help these species that have been impacted by the introduction of the brown tree snake. For coral, of course, there's the Coral Reef Alliance, and for the fireflies, the mysterious lantern fireflies, there's the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, and the Massachusetts Audubon, which does a yearly firefly watch. Lastly, for sea turtles, there are a number of organizations, but we're specifically going to highlight the Sea Turtle Conservancy, which has donation and volunteer opportunities, and the Olive Ridley Project. All of these these are just a few of your options in terms of helping to combat the endangered species, not just in this podcast, but those that are facing threats everywhere, especially similar threats to the ones that we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. We've also attached links for these in the description box, so please check those out as well, in case you didn't catch the audio of that. Well, we hope you enjoyed our conversation about mirror species, the extinct and the endangered. And remember, you can always make a change.